The Fed and the Treasury are adamant that they have never printed money in the QE era. Why are they gaslighting you? Because there's a debt crisis and they don't want the dollar to go bankrupt and stop being the reserve currency. And so they're figuring out a narrative to get institutions behind it to ultimately finance trillions of dollars of new debt into the system. Obviously, then it's like, how high could Bitcoin go? It could literally go to infinity.
We're here with Matt Cole, known as the black horse of the Bitcoin Treasury companies. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I want you to tell me more, about your story and how you guys are positioned to be one of the top Bitcoin Treasury companies.
Yeah, so currently we're the 9th largest global corporate holder of Bitcoin. We are one of, if not the fastest movers up the ladder. And the reason that we've had such high success is that we have really simplified our corporate strategy, and we're doing something very similar to MicroStrategy themselves, right? And that's focusing on digital credit. So we were the second issuer after Strategy to launch a preferred equity instrument in SATA, and that has fueled exponential growth for our company. And so when we last September closed our Bitcoin Treasury merger, which is after we talked last year, we started with about 5,000 Bitcoin. And since then, we acquired another Bitcoin Treasury company, Semler, which added another 5,000.
From Semler Scientific?
Yep, so we acquired them, we merged them into our business. So that was a big boost to our Bitcoin holdings, and we did it in a way that was accretive, it added value. And then we launched a pref in SATA, and we're now up to over 14,000 Bitcoin, quickly stacking. Our stock is trading off the charts, very liquid, which is allowing us to continue to buy Bitcoin. So yesterday we announced a purchase of another 789 Bitcoin, which is large. You might say that's small versus Strategy, but if you were to equivalently size it to a Strategy buy, it'd be like Strategy buying 44,000 Bitcoin in a week, which would be a jaw-dropping number. So we're rocking and rolling.
So I'm sort of a foreigner to the Bitcoin treasuries, and you said something very interesting, that you acquired Semler. So what's the move for Bitcoin treasury companies? Acquiring other Bitcoin treasury companies or stacking your own Bitcoin? At the end of the day, which one will help you boost and become one of the top 5 Bitcoin treasury companies?
Yeah, so the most sustainable model is to buy new Bitcoin. When you first launch, there can be some economies of scale of combining together where two companies can be stronger together than they are separately, right? And so this is partially a game of scale, and so we combined together to push us over 10,000 Bitcoin, which allowed us to really turn the burners on our preferred equity. At this point, I would say we're less likely to do more acquiring of other Bitcoin treasury companies, but it wouldn't surprise me to see other Bitcoin treasury companies combine forces, kind of in a similar way to what we did to kind of boost them up and really get that flywheel going. But at this point, it's net new Bitcoin buys, stack stats that way.
I like that. You went from one of the biggest pension funds in the world to running the first publicly traded asset management Bitcoin treasury company. What was the moment Bitcoin stopped being something you're aware of and became something you're staking your whole career on?
Yeah, so it started with staking my entire net worth on it before my career. In like most Bitcoiners, in 2016, after being a Bitcoin skeptic for a few years, I was running a large fixed income fund, and I was talking to the US Federal Reserve, the US Treasury, and I became very convicted about the problems with debasement of fiat currency, something that all Bitcoiners talk about. And I was talking directly to the Fed and the Treasury and seeing the issues with money printing and the debt crisis. And that, I would say, was the primary factor. The second factor was, fixing the money, freedom money, and opt out from the system that had me move literally all of my money and to put it into Bitcoin on a personal basis in late 2016 and early 2017. So I feel like that's not an OG, but maybe it's getting more closer to an OG as more time goes on. And so that was on a personal basis. And then when Strive had the opportunity to become a Bitcoin treasury company, that just became a dream job, that on a corporate level, I could be a massive stacker of Bitcoin and even further my own like personal all-in nature to Bitcoin. Now my career is tied to Bitcoin, all my net worth's tied to Bitcoin, and I love it. And you're obviously a Bitcoiner that when you understand Bitcoin, I sleep really well with that risk because I'm so comfortable in where this is ultimately going.
Oh, that's insane. One of the things that stuck out to me was that you were working with the Fed and you were getting, I would like to say, red flags. Can you tell me the top 3 red flags from the Fed?
Yeah, so I'll give you the number one because it's actually really important. So the Fed and the Treasury are adamant that they have never printed money in the QE era. And so this was before I was a Bitcoiner. I was just talking to them, I was like, how are you not printing money? Look at QE, look at the amount of currency in the system. You are directly buying, the Fed is buying the debt of the US Treasuries. Like it's like one hand moves to the other, this doesn't make sense. And they said, well, we're not directly buying it, this is their answer, we're not directly buying it from the Treasury. Well, what they were doing is that the Treasury would issue new debt, so that they would borrow money, and they would sell that money to banks, so like a Goldman Sachs, and then literally within a week, a couple days later, the Goldman Sachs would sell those bonds to the Fed. And so it was going from the Treasury to Goldman Sachs to the Fed. And that's why it's technically not money printing. If you take Goldman Sachs out of it and it just goes directly from the Treasury to the Fed, everyone would agree, the Fed, the Treasury, that it's money printing. And so I view it as money laundering, actually, that they're laundering the money through the Wall Street banks, and technically speaking, it's not money printing, but it's money printing. And the fact that they wouldn't just say that to me was like, okay, these people are gaslighting the largest institutions in America, right? Not me personally, it's just like, I worked for a large pension. I was like, if that's happening, then this is really a massive house of cards that no one will be willing to even talk about. And that ultimately led me to Bitcoin being the only answer, including the best answer.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So they're like brainwashing themselves to thinking like, no, we're not printing money.
Yeah, and a lot of people actually believe that in institutional circles. And I don't know if it was, at the time, this is when Janet Yellen was the Fed of the chair. It was like, just because you trust these institutions so deeply that you can't envision that they are gaslighting you. Why are they gaslighting you? Because there's a debt crisis and they don't want the dollar to go bankrupt and stop being the reserve currency. And so they're figuring out a narrative to get institutions behind it to ultimately finance trillions of dollars of new debt into the system. And that's ultimately what they have to do. And they have to do it or the dollar will collapse and it won't be the reserve currency. And then obviously then it's like, how high could Bitcoin go? It could literally go to infinity, right? Like, I mean, we talk about, Bitcoin going to 1 million or stuff like that. And that's more of like, Bitcoin increasing in purchasing power. The collapse is really even like, it's not a scenario that I want to see. It's just a scenario I think ultimately happens because I don't see how it doesn't.
Wow. I was at a Human Rights Foundation dinner and they were showing us the different currencies from, like, for example, Zimbabwe. They had the currency and it was like 500 trillion.
Yes.
And you see all the zeros. Obviously, you look at the US dollar and you're like, oh, that's not going to happen. But they thought that wasn't going to happen to them either. So, wow. Bitcoin is the hurdle rate. That's Strive's signature line. Unpack it for me. What actually changes about how you run a company when every decision gets measured against Bitcoin instead of the S&P?
Yeah, so Bitcoin is the hardest hurdle rate to beat. It obviously goes up substantially over time. It's very volatile in the short term. And so the reason we set that as the hurdle rate is that if you don't think you can beat Bitcoin, you should just buy Bitcoin. And so that really reframes how you think about the world. And so what it does is it makes you very bearish on almost any company's operating profits, because you say, okay, I have a company that's spitting out profits, and you could continue to run that company, put headcount into it, and you have to say, or I could sell that company, and you sell it for 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, $1 billion, and you buy Bitcoin today. And the question becomes, which will outperform over the long run? And I think that beating Bitcoin is almost impossible. And so when we set Bitcoin as a hurdle rate, what we ultimately do is we've done is we've created a structured finance company where SATA is basically borrowing money that we never have to pay back. We pay a low double-digit yield. And then for us, we need Bitcoin to go up on average more than about 6% per year. And we could pay our interest indefinitely as a company. And ultimately, it's like, do I think that that will beat Bitcoin? I think that's the most efficient way to beat Bitcoin if you're confident that Bitcoin's going to go up over the course of the next 10, 20 years. And we are so confident in that. And so it's why it's like you almost simplify things, right? Like on one hand, you could hire thousands of people. On the other hand, you could just buy more Bitcoin. And we think that's the best path to make money.
Talking about buying more Bitcoin, last year we were sitting in these chairs and you were in the board of Meta and you were able to ask Mark to because Mark is like the #1 shareholder, to put Bitcoin in their balance sheet. So if Mark Zuckerberg were here right now, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that it's almost irresponsible for a corporation today to not have Bitcoin on your balance sheet, because ultimately you want a balance sheet to protect your company to be able to grow into the future. And right now you have dollars being debased at a massive scale. And then on the other hand, you have substantial AI risks that are risks to every single company, and it's a risk to Meta. It's substantially bigger risk to software companies around the world that can be one-shotted and can have their entire business model gone tomorrow. But how do you hedge against those two risks? You ultimately need to invest in scarcity in this world of abundance that we're entering into. And so every company should hold Bitcoin. I think companies that, if there's a scale of how big your company is at risk of not being viable tomorrow because of AI, and I just to briefly touch on that, when the internet started, over 50% of the companies in the S&P 500 fell out over the course of 15 to 20 years. And so the failure rate was over 50%. So if you're a company and you're like, with AI, and it's probably going to move faster than the internet, maybe over the next 5 or 10 years, there's a 50% chance that I'm going to fall out of the S&P 500 and decline. What should I do? I should secure my future through my balance sheet today while I still can. And that's why you buy Bitcoin. And I think the case is really strong for Meta, and it's extremely strong, almost to a point of desperation, to the average S&P 500 company.
It's crazy. I still don't understand why Meta would not have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, because you have an interesting fact about Mark, about his goat. What was it?
Yeah, so his goat is literally named Satoshi. So you can't make this up, right? And what probably is happening is Mark probably owns a lot of Bitcoin. And
yeah, that is
he'll probably say, like a classic Bitcoiner, like, I lost it on a boat, I don't own any, but like he's probably stacking a major amount, right? But for his company, he should as well. And that's part of the reason we started with him, is like, you want to start with someone that's a Bitcoiner. And there's other Bitcoiners. I think the new CEO of Apple is actually close friends with Saylor, is a Bitcoiner. And so ultimately, I think we'll see adoption of Bitcoin, of digital credit, broader across the ecosystem. But ultimately, my view is like Bitcoin doesn't need corporations. Bitcoin doesn't need countries to adopt it. It's actually the countries and the corporations that need Bitcoin, right? Not the other way around. And I think that's something that should be pretty comforting for the Bitcoiners.
So now I want to talk about the public companies. How many public companies are running a Bitcoin Treasury strategy by this time next year? And what are the names that will most likely shock people?
Yeah, so I think the average corporation that holds Bitcoin is a small business that owns just a small amount of it. And so you don't hear about them. They're not on bitcointreasuries.net, right? They're not announcing their public Bitcoin buys. They're just privately stacking small amounts of Bitcoin. And I think that always makes sense. It's always a smart decision. And we'll never probably have great data of how many of those companies there are. On the public company side, I think we saw too many companies launch over the last year without deep plans for how they were actually going to operate their strategy. So they didn't have a large strategy. They put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And now I think we're probably in a period of consolidation where there will be some winners that have teams that have, whether they're going all in on digital credit like Strive and Strategy, or whether they're doing an operating business that's spitting out profits and stacking Bitcoins. I think there'll be, in the 10s to 20s of winners. And then I think that consolidation will ultimately at some point reverse and start moving up again in more public companies owning Bitcoin. Because I think that's ultimately where we go, but I think it got a little bit frothy in how many companies launched over the last year. So That's my prediction.
Makes sense. Now we're gonna do some quick fire questions. If Bitcoin hits $1 million, what's the first thing you would do?
Probably buy more Bitcoin.
That's a good
And I say that because we were joking that ultimately, if the dollar is going to collapse, and you see these failed fiat currencies where they print $1 billion or $1 trillion bills, that there really is ultimately no limit to how high Bitcoin can go. I think Bitcoin could go to $1 million easy and just be worth more, where you could purchase a lot more. But ultimately, this is about fiat currency debasement. And so when Bitcoin goes down 50%, you're still in a great mood. I'm in a great mood. If Bitcoin goes up to $1 million, it'll be the same, because I just think that's an inevitability. So
What's the most wrong you've ever been about Bitcoin?
the most wrong, I think when I was first investing in Bitcoin, so late 2016, early 2017, I would not have been able to give you as coherent of an answer about Bitcoin going up forever. At the time, I viewed it more as like a multi-year trade than something that you never sell and you just hold forever, because ultimately the dollar is going to continue to be debased. So the ultimate thing I was wrong about is I wasn't bullish enough on Bitcoin. And I like to say that to people, is that you're not bullish enough. And I don't mean that from a cheesy perspective. I mean it from the perspective, I think that too many people still think about, oh, when it gets to $1 million, I'm going to sell it. And it's just like, you never have to sell it. Like, you just stack it, you hold it. Hopefully you can spend it in the future and treat it more like a currency, but it's just a perpetual holding that people should have for generations for their families.
I like that. What's the most wrong? Not being bullish enough. If you could orange pill one person on earth who hasn't been orange pilled yet, who would it be and why?
I would orange pill DC. And I know it's not a person, but the United States, when Trump became president, talked about starting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I think that is the single most important piece of crypto legislation that could possibly happen out of DC. Frankly, almost the only thing that matters, because of the debt crisis in this country. And it seems to have been deprioritized because Congress can't get it. And I think that is a substantial concern for the future health of the United States, for the future concern of the dollar. And so if I could orange pill one person, it would be whoever could push through a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the United States. Again, not because Bitcoin needs a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but because the US needs Bitcoin.
The U.S. needs Bitcoin. You say that the Congress can't get it. What do you mean they can't? Like, they don't grasp it, or they can't physically buy Bitcoin? Or have like a wallet?
The U.S.? So ultimately, a strategic Bitcoin reserve has to pass through Congress to have staying power. So if Trump on his own bought a bunch of Bitcoin, then probably in 2 years, a bunch of Bitcoin sold. That's not a real solution. And Congress cannot agree on the importance of this. They don't understand the importance of this. They don't understand Bitcoin versus crypto, Bitcoin versus Trump coin. They just kind of lump it all in, and that's a big problem, right? Like, Bitcoin is distinct from all the cryptocurrencies, and DC, I still think, doesn't see that. And they're too focused on stablecoins and trying to preserve the dollar, which I think they should do, but ultimately they need to do long-term planning, and that's Bitcoin, and it needs to come through Congress.
Bueno, Matt, the floor is yours. Is there anything you want people to know?
Yeah, so I think sometimes the Bitcoin community can have a negative perception on digital credit. So on Stretch and on SATA, and they just say, buy Bitcoin. And I want to actually address that to this audience, because I think it's actually important, and I think that the Bitcoin community would be stronger if we rally together. And the reality is that digital credit is being adopted by people that either can't or won't buy Bitcoin. They can't handle the actual volatility of Bitcoin. They aren't educated about Bitcoin. So I think the right approach is everyone should be going out there and trying to orange pill the world. And we should also be pushing the maximum amount of Bitcoin exposure into every person's account. And some people, just for whatever reason, can't handle that volatility, and that digital credit gives them a double-digit yield. It's still Bitcoin exposure. It's better than anything else that's not Bitcoin, and driving that adoption will ultimately be helpful for Bitcoin and also for the portfolios of those individuals. And so I would just say that I view us all as allies, as friends, and as true orange-pilled people, and that it would be good, I think, for the community to come together versus attack each other all the time.
For sure. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you
This
for
was
having me.
amazing.